My name is Eden Travers. I buried my father last Thursday, though it felt more like a merger announcement than a memorial. There was no choir, no folded flag, no last words, just a beige conference room at the Hilton downtown, and my sister Miranda flipping through a portfolio like she was closing a deal. When I walked in wearing my dress blues, she didn't even look up. "Oh, you made it," she said without warmth. "Don't tell me you flew in just for this." I didn't answer. I just sat. That's how it's always been her name on the accounts, my name on a uniform. She builds trust funds. I fly over war zones. And yet, as we stood in line at the Lisbon airport the next day, Miranda still found the breath to sneer. "Please tell me you're not wearing that whole soldier get-up on the plane." I adjusted my collar. "It's called a uniform." She smirked. "Well, I hope it comes with a parachute." I didn't flinch, not because it didn't sting, but because I'd stopped expecting anything from her a long time ago. But what neither of us knew then was that 39,000 feet above the Atlantic, her voice would finally go quiet, and mine would be the only one that mattered. The room smelled like stale coffee and copy paper. Dad's attorney, some man named Corrigan I'd never met, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat like he was announcing quarterly losses, not reading a man's final will. Miranda sat at the head of the table, legs crossed, eyes dry. She wore a charcoal suit sharp enough to cut through sentiment. On the legal pad in front of her, she'd already highlighted key points. I hadn't even unbuttoned my coat. There were no condolences, no stories, not even a photo of him on the table. Just line items and signatures. To Miranda, Travers Corrigan read the primary executor of the estate and recipient of all investment holdings, real estate, and controlling interest in Travers Strategic Trust. Miranda didn't blink. She just nodded once, like a CEO approving a memo. Corrigan continued flipping to the second page. To Eden Travers, he glanced at me, a personal memento. As per Mr. Travers' written instruction, he reached into a small manila envelope and handed me a worn military coin and a single photograph. My father in 1973, standing beside an F-4 Phantom Expression, unreadable. That was it. No apology, no letter, no explanation. Just metal and memory. I slid the coin into my pocket without a word. Miranda leaned back. "Well," she said, stretching slightly, "I suppose it's poetic. You get a token, I get the work." There was no one else in the room to object. My mother had passed years earlier. No cousins, no uncles. Just the two of us, like always, one with all the power, the other with none of the permission. When we stepped into the hallway, Miranda's heels clicked against the marble floor like punctuation. "You're staying in Lisbon long, just until the morning." She nodded, already pulling out her phone. "Good. I'll book the return ticket. Business class. Same row, different seats." I stopped. "You're booking for both of us." "It would look odd if you flew coach. Optics matter." I almost laughed. "You think anyone cares where I sit?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "They will, once the press release goes out." And that's when I realized this wasn't a funeral to her. It was branding. She turned to go, but paused. "By the way, don't bring that whole 'I'm the honorable daughter in uniform' thing on the plane. It's not charming." I met her gaze. "I don't need charm, Miranda. I need clearance." She looked at me like I'd just spoken in Morse code, then walked away. In that moment, I didn't feel grief. I felt clarity. She thought she'd won. But the sky has a way of stripping things down to the truth, and we were headed straight into it. The Lisbon airport was humming at 6:00 a.m., all glass and polished stone, and people pretending to be patient. Miranda cut through the check-in line like it was designed for her. She wore black silk oversized sunglasses and the kind of scarf that cost more than a month's pay in uniform. I showed my ID military orders folded neatly in my jacket. The agent glanced at my name, then at hers, then hesitated, like trying to imagine what kind of family we could possibly be. We boarded early Sky Atlantic Flight 219 Lisbon to New York nonstop. Miranda insisted on business class aisle seats opposite each other, said we needed to keep appearances. She slid into 3A and immediately asked for sparkling water. I took 3C and didn't ask for anything. Half an hour into the flight, she leaned over the center divider with a glass in hand and said, "So you're still stationed in Germany, or is it classified now, Ramstein?" I replied simply. She sipped her drink, pretending to be casual. "Dad used to think you'd grow out of it, you know. Out of what? The whole uniform thing." I turned toward the window, even though the view was just sky. She kept going, of course. "It's just, some people enlist to serve. Others join because it's the only place they're told what to do." The jab landed, but I didn't show it. Miranda thrived on the idea that I needed her approval and hated most the fact that I didn't. I pulled out a paperback and started reading. 10 minutes passed. Then she whispered just loud enough to cut through the white noise. "You do know you're not in the will, right? The official one." I didn't look at her. "The clause on psychological fitness. Remember that post-deployment eval from Syria? The one with the 3-month leave." My fingers tightened around the book. She smiled. "I shared it with Dad's legal team, just to protect the family's interests. Don't take it personally." She said it like she was describing a weather report, not a betrayal. At that moment, I realized I'd spent years thinking we were just sisters with distance between us. But Miranda hadn't created distance. She had laid traps, and I had walked into all of them with my eyes closed. That was over now. The altitude was different, and I was finally seeing her clearly. The first jolt came as we crossed into Atlantic airspace, gentle, almost polite, like a warning knock. A few heads lifted. Miranda muttered something about European carriers cutting costs on turbulence control. The captain came on the intercom, calm and clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're hitting a patch of moderate weather. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." Miranda rolled her eyes. "Honestly, Eden, you'd think a major airline could afford smoother skies." I didn't reply. I was already listening not to her, but to the pitch of the engines, the vibration under the soles of my boots, the subtle shift in air pressure. Things only pilots or mechanics tend to notice. And what I noticed wasn't normal. Another jolt, stronger. The lights flickered. A tray clattered to the ground 2 rows back. The hum of casual conversation thinned into nervous silence. Then the smell came. Faint at first, acrid chemical, almost sweet. Electrical. I unbuckled quietly, leaned forward, and tried to spot a flight attendant. One passed briskly, her jaw, tight eyes scanning. That's when the right engine whined long and uneven, followed by a popping sound like metal snapping under stress. The cabin reacted as if on cue, gasps, someone praying, a baby crying. The seatbelt signs lit up again. Miranda clutched the armrest. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "I should have booked private." I didn't move, didn't speak. My body had already gone into flight check mode. Breathing, slow awareness sharpened every noise, feeding a calculation. Something was wrong, something critical. Then the power dimmed. Just for a second, but enough. That's when I felt it. Not fear. Clarity. The kind of stillness that only comes at 39,000 feet, when metal weather and silence conspire to teach you who's really in control. I looked over. Miranda was pale now. Her sarcasm eroded into something closer to panic. "They should be saying something," she said under her breath. "They're busy," I replied. "Or trying to fix what they can't say." She turned toward me, a flicker of accusation rising. "You're military. Can't you do something?" I held her gaze steady and flat. "Not from here. Not yet. But if things got worse, and I knew they would, then my seat number wouldn't matter. Only what I remembered would." Another jolt rocked the cabin, this one sharp, with a metallic groan that made the fuselage feel too thin, too fragile. The lights flickered again. Passengers gasped. Someone screamed from the back. The smell of burning wire thickened, undeniable now. Then came the voice, strained and cracking through the intercom. "Flight crew to cockpit. Mayday. Engine 2. Fire. Repeat, engine 2 compromised." Silence followed. Not the calm kind, the heavy kind, when everyone realizes they're strapped into a situation no one on the ground can fix in time. I was already unbuckling. "Where are you going?" Miranda hissed, grabbing my sleeve. I looked at her, not with anger, not even pity, just finality. "Forward." The flight attendant stood frozen near the galley. Her eyes caught mine. No words, just a small, desperate nod. I moved past rows of rigid bodies and wide eyes steady against the trembling floor. Drinks had spilled. A man was whispering prayers. A child sat clutching a stuffed bear, too scared to cry. At the cockpit door, I knocked hard. No response. I tried the handle. Unlocked. Inside the scene was chaos. The captain was slumped forward, oxygen mask dangling uselessly from his neck. The co-pilot, barely holding on, had sweat pouring down his temple, one hand gripping the yoke, the other clutching his chest like the pressure itself was trying to collapse him. "I'm qualified military flight," I said fast. "Do you need help?" He looked up, eyes bloodshot and scared. "Can't stabilize. Right engine's gone. Hydraulics fading. He passed out 10 minutes ago." I didn't hesitate. "Move!" He slid over without protest. I strapped in, pulled on the mask, and laid both hands on the controls. The readings were worse than I expected, pressure dropping, fuel bleeding, lateral balance off by several degrees. But I'd flown through worse. I'd flown without wings. Behind me, the door creaked. Miranda stood in the threshold, jaw slack. "What are you doing?" she breathed. I didn't turn around. "Landing a plane." She took a step forward. "You can't, I can. And I will." The yoke kicked back, resisting me like a wounded animal. I leaned in steady. From the corner of my eye, I saw Miranda shrink back. No more barbs, no clever smirks. Just the realization that all the power she'd clung to was useless here. This was no boardroom. This was altitude. And up here, respect wasn't granted. It was earned. The co-pilot Stokes, his nameplate read, was pale but alert enough to support. I spoke low, and even as I recalibrated, "We've got one engine unstable, partial hydraulic loss, and a heavy fuel load. How far to the closest strip?" He swallowed hard. "McNally Field, Nova Scotia. Emergency rated. 6,000 feet. Too short for a 7-ton 77 with a belly full of fuel." I flipped the fuel crossfeed switch, watched the gauges drain slower than I needed. "Start bleeding right tank. Dump what we can." He didn't question, just moved. In the cabin, I could feel the shift passengers, sensing the altitude change, sensing something unnatural in the air. Stokes glanced over. "You ever flown commercial?" "Not once," I said. "But I've landed fighters with smoke pouring through the cockpit and half a wing missing." He let out a brittle laugh. "Good enough for me." I keyed the radio. "McNally Tower, this is Sky Atlantic 219. Captain unresponsive. Co-control assumed by military pilot. Request emergency clearance. Engine 2 out." Declaring Mayday. A pause. Then Sky Atlantic 219, "McNally reads you. Runway 17 cleared. Emergency crews standing by. You are not rated for field length. We'll make it work." The closer we got, the more the plane fought. It didn't want to descend clean. It wanted to limp, to drift. Every adjustment was a negotiation. Stokes called out speeds. "We're too hot. I know. We're too heavy. Still flying." We cleared the tree line with a whisper of margin. The runway emerged through mist like a dare. "Gear down," I ordered. Stokes flipped the switch. A pause. Then the satisfying thunk. Locked. I throttled back the one good engine. We needed drag more than thrust. The nose dipped, the plane shuddered. The yoke shook in my hands, like it resented my grip. Stokes looked out the windshield. "We're landing too fast." I didn't blink. "Then we won't bounce." Meaning, I'll kill the engine at flare. Glide the rest." He stared. "You're insane." "No. I'm exact." At 200 feet, I cut power. The silence inside the cockpit was absolute. We dropped. Touched down hard. Tires screamed. The tail slammed. Reverse thrust kicked in. Brakes groaned like something dying beneath us. The trees at the end of the runway grew larger, closer. Stokes was whispering, "Come on, come on." And just before the gravel, we stopped. Not clean, not graceful, but alive. They didn't clap. Not at first. There was too much silence in the cabin, raw, electric, shell-shocked. People breathed like they'd forgotten how. A few wept. One man near the rear sobbed into his hands. The teenage girl beside him held tight to his wrist, as if afraid the plane would still fall. I sat motionless for a moment, hands still gripping the yoke. Stokes reached over, gently peeled them off. "You just saved 300 people," he whispered. "You good?" I nodded once. Then stood. When I stepped out of the cockpit, heads turned. Some passengers stared in disbelief. Others reached for me, whispered thank you's eyes wet. And there in 3A, Miranda stood, frozen, flushed lips, parted hair slightly out of place for the first time in years. "You," she said aloud, not even trying to lower her voice. "You actually did it." I met her eyes. "Yes." She took a step forward. "You weren't even supposed to be in the cockpit." "No," I said evenly, "but 300 people are breathing because I was." Her mouth opened, but no rebuttal came. The emergency crews swarmed outside fire suppression trucks, paramedics, officers, waving passengers toward the inflatable slides. I helped an older woman to the front. A boy with a toy astronaut shirt saluted me as he passed. Miranda followed me into the jetway, still trying to regain control, not of the plane, but the story. "You can't just take credit," she snapped. "That's not how command structure works." "There are also protocols," I replied coldly. But no one else was flying the damn plane. The media caught wind within hours. Cameras circled the tarmac like vultures. I stayed silent. But Miranda didn't. Or maybe she didn't need to, because someone had filmed her mid-flight, sneering to a flight attendant. "She's not even a real pilot. She's just a toy soldier playing dress-up." The clip went viral before I made it to base housing. And the world for the first time saw Miranda Travers not as a polished investor, but as what I'd always known her to be, cruel in quiet ways. Days later, the investigations began not into the engine failure, but into me, my qualifications, my mental fitness, whether I had overstepped. They didn't ask how many lives were saved. They asked who had given me permission. And I told them the truth. No one. Because I didn't need it. The inquiry room smelled like fluorescent lights and fear of liability. Across from me sat 3 men in suits, 2 women from the FAA, and 1 Air Force liaison, whose eyes told me he didn't want to be there any more than I did. "Why did you assume control without airline clearance?" one asked. "Because the airline wasn't conscious," I replied. Another leaned forward. "You were emotionally stable during the event." "Yes." No flashbacks, intrusive thoughts, delusions of authority. I didn't blink. Just a cockpit with a dying engine and no one flying. They scribbled something down. No one nodded. No one said thank you. Later that week, my lawyer slid a folder across the table. "You were right to be suspicious," he said. "Your sister didn't just sabotage your inheritance. She rewrote the structure. Inside were records forged, clauses, redacted reports, metadata linking her to proxy firms that altered Dad's estate. The wording was surgical, mentally unfit to manage fiduciary continuity, based on a training incident, a concussion I walked off 10 years ago. She used that to disqualify you," he said. "And Dad signed it, except the notary was fake. Retired. Illegally used." I sat still, breathing shallow. "She erased you on paper before you even knew the will was real." I looked at the folder again, at the trail of names and signatures that had kept me locked out of my father's legacy, not by rejection, but by quiet deletion. "Can we take it public?" He smiled. "We can do better." By the end of the month, Miranda's name disappeared from the executive board of Travers Strategic. Internal audits began. The press didn't call it fraud. They called it governance concerns. That's how power falls in America. Not with a crash, but with a silent exit. Some nights I walk the edge of the airstrip alone. No cadets, no chatter. Just the desert wind and the hum of metal cooling under stars. I carry the patch from my first flight suit in my jacket pocket. Frayed edges stained, nearly torn in half. It flew with me through war zones, through failures, through the day I landed that 777 with 1 engine and 300 silent prayers. I never sewed it onto anything new. I just hold it, because it reminds me of who I was when no one was watching, when no one believed, when all I had was instinct and discipline, and the silence between turbulence. That silence taught me more than medals ever could. Not all victories make noise. Sometimes the greatest revenge is standing on solid ground, while the people who tried to erase you pretend not to notice you've rebuilt everything they thought they destroyed. Miranda never apologized. Not really. But she withdrew her claims. Quietly, legally, entirely. And her daughter calls me ma'am now, not because of blood, but because I earned it. Up there above the clouds, I learned the sky doesn't care about your last name. Only if you can hold the yoke steady when it matters most.